everyone. My name is Carolina and I'm representing Arkbound Foundation, a charity working to widen access to literature and improve diversity within publishing. Today we have with us Professor Rodrigo Moreira, who has written a chapter for an upcoming Arkbound book, Climate Adaptation, which is coming out this October. Professor Rodrigo Moreira holds a PhD in agroecology, sociology, and sustainable rural development from the University of Córdoba in Spain, and he is a founding member of Instituto Giramundo Mutuando, which focuses on connecting agroecology and food security movements in Brazil and around the world. He is also a consultant for agroecology and organic production for federal government projects in Brazil, and is a collaborating professor with the Center for Science and Tech for Food Sovereignty at São Paulo State University. Welcome, Professor Rodrigo, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you and writing this chapter for this important book.
Okay, so the first question I would like to ask you is about your personal journey that led to your current work with Instituto Giramundo Mutuando and ultimately to writing this chapter for this book.
Well, I helped to found Giramundo in 1998, right after I graduated from veterinary medicine school, and I'm a son of a farmer, a small farmer, and I know very well how it is to be a small farmer in a big farm world, right? So since I was very young, I was very sensitive about not just the environment, but social inequalities. And Brazil is full of them. It's a very unequal country. So we founded Giramundo, aiming to bring experiences into light that could show not just in our region in São Paulo State, but to the whole world how it's possible to manage agroecosystems, to manage food production in a different way, in a different manner than we are doing for these past 50 to 60 years after the Green Revolution took place in Brazil.
So your chapter focuses on agroecological transition. Maybe you could explain a little bit more to those watching about this concept.
Yeah, this is a concept originated from Steve Gleasman when he was thinking of how to transit, how to make a transition from a conventional system, production system, to a ecology-based transition. So what I did was to try to focus not just on the farmer at farmer level, but how we can picture broad transition at the local level, because we find that local development is the key factor to resist the inequalities that comes with a global economic system that controls everything in every area and every local. So it's very important to build policies. So local agroecologic transition can be defined as a set of endogenous and participatory social process social processes that are aiming and reflecting gradual transitions from the current local food systems to one that is governed actually by ecological principles, methods, and technologies. So agroecologic transitions um, developed is developed at the farmer level, but it is needed, it's highly needed to support it, and some guidance are needed via market formation and public policy building, implementation, development, and monitoring. So these policies shall invest public resources, right? Because we're saying we're thinking that this is a public interest matter, right? So we have to find ways to invest public local resources that are necessary to change the local food system and the local food production and consumption, considering also supporting by having some support um, within the rural extension technicians, right? Participatory research to support it, permanent education and communicative processes, and social and organizational networks to recognize, to form, and to promote local agroecological transition. So practical experiences in the territories serves at it's a kind of agroecological lighthouses that can light some way, right? Of course, anchored by local networks around the food, a system of values, thought, and action compatible with the changes processes that are that farmers and consumers are going through, right? So social forces contained in the local movements, grassroots movements articulated through forms of collective social action. Therefore, they can increase popular organization for a healthy, sustainable, nutrition sensitive, and inclusive local food systems. So advancing local agroecological transition requires guaranteeing networks of vertical and horizontal social cooperation within the scope of three dimension, right? Eco-structure, what I call eco-structural, with its compatible management systems and technologies, social political dimension, right? So we can have private and public support institution, and also the dimension of a micro social cultural dimension, right? So where we can get the individuals and the collective cooperation dynamics. So basically is transit from a conventional way of managing agricultural systems to an ecological way. But this doesn't occur naturally because our local food systems is controlled by corporate interests that control national politics and state politics. So the local arena is trapped, right, into the conventional food system.
Yes, it's interesting that you would pick up on governments and local spheres being trapped, because my next question was about the first part of your chapter, where you address the importance of the role of government in Brazil's worsening environmental and agricultural policies in the recent years. So, how do you think Brazil's situation is unique, and how does it relate to the global picture of agroecological challenges?
Well, this is an interesting question because we have been having several setbacks on the environmental and agricultural policies. We discovered in 2003, we kind of discovered that small farmers are very important for food sovereignty, right? For food sovereignty and food security at the local level and at the national level. So we discovered by statistics that most of our products that goes on the table of the Brazilian people, they come from small farmers. So we started like 20 years ago, um, a lot of laws and public national policies to try to support small farmers that were subject, that were being basically smashed by the corporate system that governs agricultural policies. So we started to build a lot of public policies towards the protection of the environment, the protection of the territories where these small communities and small food producers were growing their food and selling at local markets. So we started to strengthen um, these policies. But 7 years ago, we had a parliamentary coup where we destituted former President Dilma. And after that, we started to cut down all the advances that we had after discovering that family farm is really important. So Brazil is, as many other countries like Argentina, is trapped also to be a provider of food for the world, right? An export nation since we were discovered in the and 500 years ago. So we've been exporting everything. We've been exporting wood. We've been exporting minerals. We've been exporting sugarcane. We've been exporting ethanol. We've been exporting um, orange juice. We're the biggest exporter of orange juice, coffee. We've been exporting everything, and for the recent years, a lot of exporting of soybeans that are heavily grown with heavily used of pesticides that are contaminating our groundwater, our drinking water, and we have a lot of problems to to be a world food provider, right? Because the best food we export, the not so best food, the worst food we get to ourselves, and Brazil, as other countries, are are really trapped on this dynamic of global exporting food for the world. So what we discovered 20 years ago, as I said, is that we needed some public policies to protect local farmer, but we have been we have had a lot of setbacks, destroying like the food acquisition program that were guaranteeing market formation for small farmers. We are liberating lots of pesticides, new pesticides, old pesticides, banned pesticides in Europe and in other countries. We're still releasing them to markets to be used by farmers, by big farmers, by corporate farmers. Um, so the deforestation is gone up for the last 3 years, and so we are facing a challenge where public policy it is important, but national policies does not always get into the ground, into local areas. That's why I advocate that we should have a bottom up process of local agroecological transition policies so we can kind of manage the dependency that we have from national state policies that from a day to another can be demolished. So local realities cannot be so um, how can I say that, so uh, opened to foreign and to external influence, or bad or good influence. So we have to forget a little bit of national policies and state policies and start from the ground level, from the local level, from the municipality level. And I think a lot of countries have the same problem because the corporate world, they control, they have lobbyists, they control the policy building, they obstruct the agenda for policies for small farmers. They are obstructing the agenda for the environment protection. They are obstructing agenda for local seeds production. They are obstructing the agendas. So that's the problem. And I think it's many countries suffer the same problem, right? To be influenced by the corporate lobbyists. And this is a huge problem.
Yeah, so you have touched upon already, so you do believe that there is a potential for the inference for an influence from the ground up of smaller initiatives eventually leading to transition and policy decisions at a higher level. So in this case, what are the most inspiring examples of local agroecological transition initiatives that you have come across during your years of work?
We don't have many local, really local government policies, very strong and very tuned to this level of complexity that I try to propose, right? We have some glances, some points that are being implemented in lots of municipalities, in lots of towns, little towns. Like, for example, Botucatu, where I live, we have a very strong program that produces food within the cities, right? It's a urban agriculture movement, and also local urban agriculture program where we people who wants to grow food on the cities, they have some support. They have the land, public land, private lands. So we have a set of incentives to local food production in Botucatu. And also Maricá, for example, in Rio de Janeiro, has a very strong social policy building, and a very strong also program for producing food on the cities, because Brazil, despite of the huge, immense territory, it's a very urbanized country. So 95% of the people live in cities in Brazil already. And because the countrysides is being occupied by huge farms to export food, right? So we have to pack people in the cities. So urban agriculture is a central strategy for a local agroecological transition. So we've been having some examples for I can remember that Itanhaém, for example, Itanhaém, it's a small town on the border in the coast of São Paulo coast in Brazil, and it has a department of agriculture, because all the municipalities, they don't have structure at the local level. The, they just have one person to take care of the agricultural area, right, of the policy. So usually we don't have any public structure at local level. But Itanhaém, for example, has a very strong department of agriculture with local resources, with local funds, so they can reach out to assist traditional communities, indigenous communities, local farms, and family farmers communities. So Itanhaém could be an example of how can the public sector at the local level structure itself to have some um, condition, right, to reach out to people, to uh, really have um, some employees, right? Not employees, but workers, public workers. But we don't have usually at the local level, we don't have budget for agriculture, right? So we have some municipalities that are going forward with structuring their own department, hiring people, hiring technicians, hiring researchers, so they can all together build a network to support the transition between conventional to agroecological uh, food system.
So you've also mentioned the importance of the small farm and the family farm, and the fact that they are mostly unprotected. So how do you think that we can try to make sure that the voices and interests of the small farmers will be protected while achieving transition?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's a hard one uh, to answer, because if we don't have social mobilization, right? If we don't have recognition of the importance of the grassroots movements, we don't get real participation. We get fights, we get um, conference, right? So we have to move forward, and we have to mobilize the minds of the public resources, of the public policy makers, and entrepreneurs, the private sector. We have to raise some awareness of the importance of the grassroots movements, because the grassroots movements are usually left wing political oriented. So they're very stigmatized. I don't know if we had this word in, yeah, they're very stigmatized, and they are not comprehended, they are not supported, and they fight. The institutionality fights against grassroots movements. So it is important to raise this awareness. They are fundamental. The grassroots movements are fundamental to push to push up, not push up, but to push real social changes, right? So we have to support them. We have to strengthen their organizations. We have to look for resources so we can strengthen the grassroots movements organizations. And once we do that, maybe the grassroots movements can hold the little changes that we can put into the institutionality, because what really happens is when we get a very when we get the grassroots movements achieving local policies, and so we change the government, so these policies are broke down again, like we are seeing now in the national policy level. So it's it's not very strong, the possibility that real to incidir, I don't know how to say that, to, well, it's my English now, it's really getting rusty, so I'm sorry.
Maybe to affect or to take
to
focus on something.
Yeah, to affect, to real get into the political frame, right? Um Building the right instruments, um, as public interest, building real laws, not just the program. We have to manage to transit from government policies to state policies. So that's the main challenge. And grassroots also always they're showing how to do that. They're showing examples, but they are not embraced by the institutionality. They combat the grassroots movements in Brazil and in the whole world, I think.
So, what are the practical, most urgent steps that you see now to start moving towards the vision of just local agroecological transition? And if people want to get involved, how can they do it?
Well, we have to communicate. We have to explain. We have to raise awareness. We have to mobilize the young minds. We have to mobilize people that are fighting against all the exploitation uh, that is being currently done by the capitalist system, right, at the local level. I don't advocate to just local level, but I think the local level is the way to go to resist to a system that comes from outside and controls how the local level works. So I think we can kind of open some uh, some way if we do resist, if we do communicate with people, with consumers. So it's urgent to raise awareness between the consumers, because they have to know what they are consuming, to know that they are consuming food with levels, rising levels of all kinds of pesticides, right? And so but we're talking about a country in Brazil. We have two, two twenty, 220 million people, right? So nowadays we have at least 20 million people starving in Brazil, and we are the biggest food producer in the world. We have almost 100, half of the country, 100 million people are suffering some way of food insecurity in Brazil. So we have a lot of problems, and but society fights against these problems, and these are the grassroots movements. So we have to first strengthen their organizations. We have to invest in their organizations. Professionals have to engage in these organizations so we can have a strong bottom-up movement, social movement at the local level. And we have to build local laws that are complex laws that can manage, not um, because to change the food system, it's not a simple way, it's not a simple thing to do. There's no simple solution for complex problems. So we have to find at the same time and push at the same time lots of alternatives, lots of ways to change the food system. That's why I advocate that it's not just the eco-structural dimension. We have we have a very clear social cultural change that we have to do. We have a very clear social political change that we have to do. We have to engage science because science is controlled by the paradigm of the green revolution, of the agrarian capitalism. So we have to change science. If we change science, we change the food system, we change the production system. So it's urgent to gain arena at the scientific level, bring more scientists to work and to do transdisciplinary projects, research projects within and with the movements, with the grassroots movements. We have to raise funds from the private sector. We have to raise funds from the public sector to invest in these changes because we are not going to change a way of functioning the system to another way if we don't inject energy, if we don't inject resources, real resources. So raise funds for agroecological transition, I think it's one of the main parts of this change. And it's a complex issue. It's hard to explain in 1 minute all the actions, right, that is needed to really push our local agroecological transition, state agroecological transition, national agroecological transition, the world agroecological transition. This is going to be a process, maybe 500-year process. I don't know. Let's see.
Okay, so speaking of 500 years, so a little bit less time, what are your hopes for the future? What do you hope that this book will achieve? And well, since we have the COP in November, if you have any hopes for something that would be achieved in COP, having this transition in mind.
Yeah, it's a little hard sometimes to have some hope with these meetings of the UN with the COPs, right? Because we still don't have any I don't know how to say mecanismo vinculante. How do you say that? Mecanismo vinculante. Of
Binding mechanisms, maybe.
bounding mechanisms. Yeah, maybe we don't have bounding mechanisms to the corporates, to the corporate world, right? To the corporations. They don't have any. They have just self and voluntary aims and goals, right? So it's all a set of uh, well, it's kind of it's hard because we do have to hope, right? But all these conference, the United Nations conference, they really didn't produce these bounding mechanism that can really build a compliance process so the corporate world can move and also the public policies can move. So we have to go from a voluntary set of goals to a more regulatory environment that can really push the changes, right? So, but as we are seeing now, there's a lot of a lot of problems going on with the world within the greatest big pandemic of the century. So I think for the other side, we have some hope that um, that this book, the climate adaptation book, can inspire um, policymakers, not just within the public sector, but on the private sector also, because private sector is driving the changes that we don't want in the world. So they have to shift their mentality, and I think this book is it's a wonderful way to really inspire the policymakers that we can do a lot of things, we can do a lot of changes, and the local level is really some arena that we have to focus right now. And the books brings a lot of alternatives, and we have discovered all the alternatives already, but we don't have the funds to do that. We don't have the means to do that. So what I hope is the 26th COP in Glasgow can show how we can really channel funds to fund this transition to climate adaptation, and this transition to combat and to avoid the effects of global warming that we don't really know uh, what can happen to us. We are living now a high a moment of high uncertainties, mainly with the pandemic that is due to the model, to the development model. Also, the pandemic has everything to do with industrial agriculture, to packing people on the cities with a lot of problems that we have created with the industrialism for the past 200 years. So um, we have to be patient. We have to have hope. We have to be patient. And I think the book is really it brings a lot of alternatives that needs to be seen, so the book will accomplish that. There's a lot of alternatives and a lot of projects described in this book that are not being seen. And the Arkbound Foundation work is an example of how we can discover talents on the global south that can bring real changes, right? Real possibilities for real changes. And I think the book will accomplish that.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. If
Okay.
people take just one message from the chapter, what would you like that message to be?
That's a hard one. Just one message?
One or two, just your key
Okay,
idea
okay.
that you
The
want to
main the
get.
main thing is local participation, local food, local consumption, go local, eat local, know what you're eating, know your farmer, go to visit your farmer that produces your food. That's the main message.
Great message. Very direct, very short, very clear. Okay, thank you so much,
Okay.
Professor Rodrigo, for sharing everything that you did with us. For those of you watching, if this conversation sparked your interest, you can go down to the description and check out the book, which is already on pre-order. You can also find a link to Instituto Giramundo if you want to learn more. And thank you again, Professor Rodrigo.
No, thank you, Carolina. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. Sorry about my cave English, but it's we're gonna get better. So thank you.
Thank you so much.